The bass from Club Elysium's sound system had left Raven's skull throbbing 3 hours ago. Now, at 2 a.m., her feet screamed inside sensible flats as she balanced another tray of overpriced cocktails, weaving through bodies that reeked of cologne and entitlement. Her arms ached from carrying trays for 12 hours straight, and the folded bills in her apron, tips that would barely cover groceries, and the Metro card she'd need to do this all over again tomorrow, felt heavier than they should. The neon lights pulsed in rhythm with music that had shifted from seductive to aggressive, the kind of bass that made the champagne flutes rattle on her tray. Raven had worked hundreds of nights like this, navigating the VIP section with the practiced invisibility of good service staff. But something in the air had changed. Conversations had dropped to whispers, and the usual laughter had an edge of tension she couldn't quite place. She nearly collided with him, Park Dojin, seated at the corner booth she'd been avoiding all night, surrounded by men whose suits cost more than her annual rent. The infamous Korean businessman, though everyone knew what that really meant, sat rigid in his chair, jaw clenched. 7 men in dark clothing had materialized around his table, moving with the synchronized purpose of wolves circling wounded prey. The first attacker's hand went to his waistband. Raven's tray was already in motion. Her body moved before her mind could stop it, muscle memory from a life she'd buried taking control. The metal tray became a shield as she stepped between Dojin and the closest attacker, deflecting the descending blade with a movement so precise it looked choreographed. Her heel connected with another man's knee, controlled force, tactical angle, and he crumpled. Dojin's eyes went wide, his expression frozen between shock and something else. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. Here she was, a woman in a waitress uniform worth $30, demonstrating the kind of training that money couldn't buy, and most people would never survive learning. The second attacker lunged at her with a knife that caught the strobing club lights. Raven pivoted, using the first man's collapsing body as a barrier, and brought the edge of her tray down on the attacker's wrist. Bone cracked. The blade spittered across the floor, disappearing under panicked feet as the surrounding crowd finally registered what was happening. Screams erupted. Bodies surged toward the exits in a stampede of designer heels and $1,000 shoes. But the remaining 5 attackers didn't retreat. They pressed in tighter, professional enough to know that chaos was their ally. Raven's mind clicked into the cold, clinical space she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. Threat assessment ran automatically, 3 advancing from her left, 2 flanking right to cut off Dojin's escape route. Amateur coordination, ex-military maybe, but not Tier 1. The one reaching under his jacket was the immediate problem. She moved. The serving tray became a projectile, spinning through the neon-hazed air and connecting with the gun hand before the weapon cleared leather. In the same breath, Raven closed the distance to the nearest attacker, driving her palm into his solar plexus with enough force to fold him in half. No wasted movement, no hesitation, just the brutal efficiency of someone who'd been trained to end threats, not subdue them. A hand grabbed her shoulder from behind. She trapped it against her body, dropped her weight, and sent the man flipping over her hip into the VIP table. Champagne bottles exploded across marble. Dojin pressed himself against the booth's leather backing, his own security team nowhere to be seen. Dead, fled, or bought off. 2 left standing. They exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them, then rushed her simultaneously. Raven's heel connected with the first one's kneecap, hyperextending it backward with a sound that cut through the music. She caught the second man's punch, redirected his momentum, and used his own body weight to slam him face first into the booth's wooden frame. He dropped like a stone. Silence fell over the VIP section. 7 men lay scattered across the floor in various states of consciousness, groaning or still. The music still pounded from the main floor, but here, in this bubble of violence, everything had gone quiet except for Raven's controlled breathing. She turned to face Dojin, whose expression had shifted from shock to something far more dangerous. Interest. His eyes traveled from the broken men at her feet to her face, taking in the complete absence of panic, the steady hands, the waitress who'd just dismantled a professional hit squad with a serving tray and 4 years of training she was never supposed to use again. "Who?" he said in accented English, his voice cutting through the aftermath like a blade. "The hell are you?" Raven didn't answer. She was already moving toward the service exit, her shift officially over the moment she'd thrown that first strike. The club would have security footage, the police would ask questions she couldn't answer, and Park Dojin would want explanations she'd never give. She made it 3 blocks before the black Mercedes pulled up beside her, gliding to a stop with the quiet purr of German engineering and unlimited money. The back window descended, revealing Dojin's face, composed now, the shock replaced by the calculating expression of a man who'd built an empire by recognizing valuable assets.
"Get in," he said. "Not a request." Raven kept walking. "I'm good." The car rolled forward, matching her pace. "The 7 men you incapacitated are currently being questioned by my associates. They were sent by someone who knows my schedule, my security rotations, my vulnerabilities." His eyes tracked her with the focus of a predator. "You saved my life. I would like to repay that debt." "Consider it repaid. You won't mention me to anyone, and I'll forget this ever happened." 200,000. Annual salary. The number hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Plus housing, benefits, and complete discretion regarding your previous experience. Raven's steps faltered. 200,000 was enough to disappear properly. New city, new name. The kind of fresh start that actually lasted. But it was also a trap. The kind that came with golden handcuffs and obligations that ended with her face in a file somewhere. "I'm a waitress," she said, resuming her walk. "That's all I am now. Waitresses don't move like you moved, don't assess threats like you assessed that room." Dojin leaned closer to the window, his voice dropping. "I need someone I can trust, someone whose skills match the danger I face, someone who exists outside the politics of my organization." "Then hire a bodyguard." "I have bodyguards. They disappeared the moment those men arrived." His jaw tightened. "I have a traitor in my organization, and I need someone invisible to help me find them. Someone who can stand beside me without drawing suspicion. A personal assistant who no one would suspect carries the skills to end them." Raven stopped walking. The Mercedes stopped with her. Through the tinted window, she could see Dojin's expression, not pleading, but honest. The kind of honesty that came from a man who'd just watched his carefully constructed world crack open. "I want to stay invisible," she said quietly. "Then work for me. Hide in plain sight." He produced a business card, holding it through the window. "The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, we both forget this conversation, and you go back to carrying trays for people who will never see you the way I do now." Raven took the card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, an address in the city's most expensive district. She didn't look at Dojin as the Mercedes pulled away, leaving her alone on the empty street with a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff she'd already fallen from once before. The estate sat behind iron gates and manicured hedges, the kind of old money architecture that whispered power rather than shouted it. Raven's studio apartment could have fit in the foyer 3 times over. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers. Oil paintings worth more than most people earned in a lifetime lined walls papered in silk. A woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed and radiating the quiet authority of someone who ran the household with military precision, led Raven through hallways that smelled of expensive wood polish and older money. Mrs. Chen, Dojin's head of staff, spoke in clipped sentences that made it clear she'd seen assistants come and go, and had no particular faith this one would last. "Mr. Park requires punctuality, discretion, and competence," she said, opening a door to a suite that was larger than anywhere Raven had ever lived. "Your wardrobe has been prepared. He expects you in his office at 8 tomorrow morning." The closet revealed tailored suits in charcoal and navy, silk blouses, Italian leather shoes that probably cost what Raven used to make in a month. Each piece fit perfectly. Dojin had somehow acquired her exact measurements. The thought should have unsettled her, but she recognized it for what it was: thoroughness. The same attention to detail that kept a man alive in his particular line of work. Raven stood before the full-length mirror the next morning, barely recognizing herself. The charcoal suit transformed her from invisible service worker to someone who belonged in boardrooms and private meetings. The tailored line suggested authority, respectability, the kind of armor that money bought, far more effective than Kevlar in certain situations. Dojin's office occupied the east wing, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that probably required a full-time staff. He sat behind a desk that could have doubled as a dining table, reviewing documents with the focused intensity of someone for whom every decision carried weight. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Miss Cole." Prompt. Good. The formal address felt like a costume, matching her new wardrobe. She was no longer Raven the waitress who'd stumbled into violence. She was Miss Cole, personal assistant to one of the city's most dangerous men. "Your responsibilities are simple," Dojin continued, sliding a tablet across the desk. "Attend meetings with me, take notes, observe, but mostly watch for inconsistencies, reactions that don't match words. The small tells that indicate someone is comfortable with my potential absence. You want me to identify your traitor. I want you to survive long enough to help me identify my traitor." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. "In my world, assistants are invisible, decorative, unthreatening. No one will suspect the woman carrying my calendar is also carrying the skills to dismantle them." His eyes met hers with that same calculating intensity from the club. "Welcome to the golden cage, Miss Cole. Try not to forget which side of the bars you're on." The conference room on the third floor held 12 men and a tension thick enough to choke on. Raven stood against the wall beside Dojin's chair, tablet in hand, playing the role of dutiful assistant, while her trained eyes catalogued everything the expensive suits tried to hide. Kim Jae-sung, head of distribution, sat with his hands folded on the table, clean nails, smooth knuckles, the hands of someone who gave orders rather than carried them out. But when Dojin questioned a shipment delay, Jae-sung's fingers twitched toward his phone, twice. Nervous habit or coded signal. Raven made a mental note. Lee Min-ho, security chief, had the opposite problem. His knuckles bore fresh scabs, bruising that suggested recent violence. Not unusual for his position, except his men were the ones who should carry those marks. Leaders who still got their hands dirty were either desperate to prove something or cleaning up their own mistakes. The meeting followed a rhythm Raven recognized from her old life, the careful dance of men who respected hierarchy because violating it carried consequences measured in blood. They spoke in a mixture of English and Korean, but the real language was in posture and silence. Who spoke first? Who waited for permission? Who held Dojin's gaze and who looked away? Yang Dae-hyun, the financial advisor, met Dojin's eyes without flinching. Confidence or guilt, Raven couldn't tell yet. But when discussion turned to the club attack, Dae-hyun's expression remained unchanged while others shifted uncomfortably. Either exceptional composure or advanced knowledge that left him unsurprised. "Miss Cole," Dojin said without looking at her, "summarize the key points." The room's attention shifted to her for the first time, 12 pairs of eyes assessing, dismissing, categorizing her as decoration with a notepad. Perfect. Raven recited shipment numbers and territory disputes with the detached efficiency of someone who hadn't spent the entire meeting reading the room's violence like a second language. When she finished, the men returned to their discussion, writing her off as irrelevant. Dojin caught her eye as the meeting concluded, the barest hint of approval in his expression. She'd played her part flawlessly, invisible, competent, forgettable. Later, in the empty hallway outside Dojin's office, she scrolled through her observations, Jae-sung's nervous tells, Min-ho's bruised knuckles, Dae-hyun's unsettling calm. Each man carried secrets in the spaces between their words, in the careful way they navigated Dojin's presence.
Your assessment? Dojin emerged from his office, jacket removed, the careful formality of the meeting stripped away. They're all afraid of you, Raven said. But one of them isn't afraid enough. Someone in that room has already made peace with your death, and that kind of acceptance shows differently than fear. Dojin's jaw tightened. Who? Give me time. Fear and guilt wear similar masks. I need to see them when they think no one's watching. She met his gaze. That's when people show you who they really are. Raven spotted the tail 3 blocks from the estate, a dark sedan with tinted windows that maintained a careful 2-car distance as she walked toward the downtown district. Old instincts kicked in, the ones she'd spent 2 years trying to bury under normalcy and minimum wage paychecks. She told Dojin she needed to retrieve items from her apartment, a flimsy excuse to escape the estate's suffocating opulence for an hour. He'd offered a driver. She declined. Private mistake, she realized now. The sedan maintained its distance as she turned down Merchant Street, then followed when she cut through the farmer's market that should have been too crowded for vehicular pursuit. Professional work, not street thugs or opportunists, but trained surveillance that knew how to blend into urban patterns. Raven's mind catalogued exit routes while her body maintained the casual pace of someone unaware they were being hunted. The coffee shop on the corner had a rear exit. The parking garage 2 blocks ahead offered vertical escape options. The construction site across the street provided cover and improvised weapons. She chose the parking garage. The concrete structure's shadows swallowed her as she entered, footsteps echoing off oil-stained floors. She counted to 30, then doubled back to a maintenance alcove that offered a clear view of the entrance. The sedan idled outside for 2 minutes before disgorging 2 men in dark clothing that screamed private security. They moved with coordinated efficiency of former military, splitting up to cover more ground, hands resting near concealed weapons. Not police, not Dojin's people. She'd memorized his security team's faces, which meant someone else had taken an interest in the boss's new assistant. Raven pressed deeper into the shadows, every muscle coiled. She could take them, her training hadn't faded that much, but violence would raise questions she couldn't answer.
Would confirm that Dojin's assistant was more than she appeared, and confirmation was ammunition in the wrong hands. The men swept through 3 levels before returning to their vehicle empty-handed. Raven waited 30 minutes after they'd gone before emerging, taking a circuitous route back to the estate that added an hour to her journey. Dojin stood in the foyer when she arrived, arms crossed, expression carved from granite. You were followed. Not a question. Raven wondered how many security cameras had tracked her route, how many of his people had been shadowing her shadows. 2 men, professional surveillance. They wanted to know who I was, where I'd go, whether I was worth additional scrutiny. She met his gaze without flinching. I lost them. No, Dojin said quietly. You revealed that you knew how to lose them. There's a difference. He moved closer, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Your anonymity is dead, Miss Cole. Someone knows you're more than an assistant now, which means the traitor is moving faster than anticipated. Or they're testing you, Raven countered, seeing how you protect your new acquisition. Either way, the clock is running. His eyes held that predatory focus she'd first seen in the club, and when it stops, one of us ends up dead. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a building that predated the skyscrapers surrounding it, all exposed brick and private rooms where deals were made in whispers over Wagyu beef and aged whiskey. Raven followed Dojin through doors held open by men whose bulges beneath tailored jackets weren't subtle. 5 bosses sat around a table large enough for a corporate board meeting, Chinese, Russian, Italian, and 2 Korean factions that eyed each other with the barely concealed hostility of old grudges. Dojin took his seat with the careful confidence of someone entering a lion's den with nothing but his reputation as armor. Raven stood behind his chair, hands clasped, tablet ready, the picture of professional invisibility. But her eyes were working, cataloging every face, every gesture, every micro-expression that betrayed the thoughts expensive suits tried to hide. Viktor Kuznetsov, the Russian, watched Dojin with the flat stare of a man who'd killed enough people to find it boring. His bodyguard, however, kept glancing at Raven, not with interest, but assessment. Recognition, maybe. Had he been in the club that night? The lighting had been poor, the chaos absolute.
Chen Wei, representing the Shanghai Syndicate, spoke in Mandarin-accented English about territory disputes and shipment routes, professional courtesy masking the knife-edge tension of competing interests. His assistant mirrored Raven's position, though the woman's eyes never left her tablet, either supremely disinterested or playing the same game Raven was. The Italians, the Castellano brothers, brought their own tensions, one brother constantly deferring to the other in a dynamic that screamed dysfunction. The younger one's leg bounced beneath the table, a nervous energy that suggested either cocaine or fear. But it was Park Sang-min, head of the rival Korean faction, who held Raven's attention. He sat directly across from Dojin with the relaxed posture of someone who knew something the others didn't. When discussion turned to the club attack, his expression remained neutral, but his fingers drummed once against the table, the same pattern Jae-sung had tapped on his phone during the earlier meeting. A signal, or shared knowledge. "Your new assistant," Sang-min said in Korean, his eyes finally landing on Raven. "Very attentive. Does she understand our language?" Dojin's jaw tightened fractionally. Miss Cole's skills lie in organization, not linguistics. "Pity," Sang-min smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "I find it's always useful to know who understands what in rooms like these." The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Every bodyguard's hand shifted closer to concealed weapons. Raven's weight settled onto the balls of her feet, muscle memory preparing for violence even as her face remained professionally blank. "Gentlemen," Viktor interjected, his voice carrying the weary authority of someone tired of posturing. "We're here to discuss territory, not test each other's staff." The moment passed, but Raven felt the weight of Sang-min's attention like a target painted on her back. He knew something. Whether he'd orchestrated the club attack or simply knew who had, his confidence suggested protection from consequences. Dojin stood as the meeting concluded, his hand briefly touching Raven's elbow. A warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell. They walked to the elevator in silence, surrounded by enemies wearing ally masks, and Raven understood with perfect clarity that the traitor wasn't just in Dojin's organization. The conspiracy reached higher and deeper than either of them had anticipated. Raven found the evidence at 3 a.m, hunched over Dojin's office computer while the estate slept around her. Bank transfers buried in legitimate business accounts, encrypted emails that took her 2 hours to crack, using skills from a life she'd tried to forget.
Communications with Sang-min's people dating back 6 months, carefully orchestrated to avoid Dojin's usual security protocols. Yang Dae-hyun, the financial advisor who'd met Dojin's eyes without flinching because he'd already made peace with betrayal. The man who controlled the money flow and knew every vulnerability in the organization's armor. Her hands stopped moving across the keyboard as footsteps echoed in the hallway. Too heavy for Mrs. Chen, too confident for security making rounds. Yang Dae-hyun entered the office with a gun already drawn, his expression carrying the resigned calm of someone executing a necessary task. "I wondered how long it would take you to find it," he said in perfect English. "You're better than I expected. Former military? Intelligence?" Raven stood slowly, hands visible, calculating distances. 12 feet between them. Too far to close before he fired, but the desk offered cover, and the letter opener in the pen holder could become a weapon if she moved fast enough. "Does it matter?" she asked. "Not particularly. You were never supposed to be here. The club attack should have succeeded." He kept the gun level, professional grip, finger resting outside the trigger guard. Trained, then. But Dojin's paranoia gave him one night of luck. Unfortunately for you, luck runs out. He trusted you. He trusted the version of me I showed him for 8 years. That's the difference between men like Dojin and men like me. He believes loyalty can be bought. I learned long ago that loyalty is just another transaction waiting for a better offer. Yang Dae-hyun's expression hardened. Sang-min offered me a partnership, a seat at the table instead of standing behind it. You understand what that means. Raven did. In this world, proximity to power wasn't the same as having it. Yang Dae-hyun had spent years watching Dojin command respect he believed he'd earned himself. So you kill him, take your reward, and hope Sang-min honors his promises? She shifted her weight slightly, testing his reaction. The gun tracked her movement. That's not a transaction. That's just faith with worse odds. Perhaps. But faith is easier when you've already eliminated the alternatives. His finger moved to the trigger. You can run, I'll tell Dojin you were the traitor and disappeared, or you can die here, and I'll arrange it to look like you attacked him first. Either way, your invisibility is gone. The choice hung between them like a blade. Raven's old life had prepared her for moments like this. The split-second decision between survival and sacrifice. She'd run before. Changed names, cities, histories. She could do it again. But Dojin's face flashed in her mind, the way he'd looked at her in that club, seeing not a waitress but someone who'd fought beside him when his own people had fled. Raven's hand moved toward the letter opener. "Fight, then," she said quietly, and dove behind the desk as the first shot shattered the silence. The warehouse district smelled of diesel and rust, row after row of abandoned industrial buildings that the city had forgotten and criminal enterprises had claimed. Raven moved through the shadows with the practiced silence of someone who'd done this before, in places far worse than a forgotten shipping facility on the city's edge. Daehan had survived their confrontation with a bullet in his shoulder and enough time to make a phone call before Dojin's security arrived. His last act of betrayal, revealing the location where Sang-min's people held Kim Jae-sung's daughter, insurance to keep the distribution chief compliant during the final stages of the coup. Dojin had wanted to send his entire security team. Raven had convinced him otherwise. A hostage situation required precision, not overwhelming force. Too many bodies meant too many chances for the girl to die in crossfire. What she didn't say, she needed to do this alone, to prove to herself that she could still be the weapon she'd been trained to be, that 2 years of invisibility hadn't dulled the edge that had kept her alive. The warehouse's north entrance hung open, an invitation or a trap. Raven chose the rusted fire escape instead, scaling to the second floor where broken windows offered access and elevated vantage points. Her eyes adjusted to the dim interior, cataloging the space through the same clinical lens she'd used in the club. 4 men on the ground floor surrounding a shipping container. The girl inside, probably. 12 years old, terrified, leverage against her father's compliance. 3 more guards patrolling the perimeter. 7 total. Better odds than the club, but these men would be expecting trouble. Raven dropped through a skylight with controlled precision, landing behind the first guard before he registered movement. Her arm wrapped around his throat, cutting off air and sound. He slumped unconscious as she lowered him to the concrete floor. 2 and 3 came together, alerted by their companion's sudden silence. Raven used a support beam as cover, waiting for them to split up the way poorly trained security always did. She took the first with a strike to the temple, the second with his partner's weapon turned against him. The men by the container reacted with professional speed, weapons drawn, fanning out to create crossfire angles, smarter than the club attackers. Sang-min had sent his better people this time. Raven moved like smoke through the warehouse machinery, using the industrial debris as both cover and weapons. A length of chain became a whip that disarmed one guard. A pallet jack's handle became a lever that dropped another. The training that had cost her everything came flooding back, muscle memory and tactical thinking merging into the efficient violence she'd tried to escape. The last man standing was the leader, older than the others, holding a knife to the container's lock. "One more step and the girl dies," he said in Korean. Raven's response came in the same language, words she hadn't spoken in years. "Then you die next, and she still gets rescued. Your choice." His eyes widened at her fluent Korean, the final piece of her puzzle clicking into place for an enemy who'd underestimated the waitress-turned-assistant. His hesitation cost him everything. Raven closed the distance, disarmed him, and left him zip-tied beside his unconscious companions. The girl emerged from the container shaking but alive, and Raven realized with perfect clarity that she'd finally stopped running from who she'd always been. The conference room had been rebuilt since the coup attempt, new furniture replacing what had been destroyed when Dojin's loyalists purged the organization of Sang-min's infiltrators. Dae-hyun's arrest had triggered a cascade of revelations, names and bank accounts and safe houses tumbling out like dominoes. Sang-min himself had disappeared, though rumors suggested he'd fled to Shanghai with what remained of his assets. Raven stood at the head of the table now, not against the wall. The tailored suit she wore was charcoal gray, severe and commanding, nothing like the waitress uniform that felt like a costume from another life. 12 faces watched her with the wary respect reserved for people who'd proven themselves in blood. Kim Jae-sung sat with his daughter safely home, the gratitude in his eyes mixed with fear of what Raven represented. Lee Min-ho, the security chief, had resigned after the coup, his bruised knuckles and divided loyalties making him a liability Dojin couldn't afford. The new faces around the table were younger, hungrier, and smart enough to understand that the rules had changed. Dojin occupied his usual seat, but his eyes tracked to Raven whenever decisions needed to be made about security protocols, threat assessment, personnel vetting. The dynamic had shifted. From boss and assistant to something more complex, partners bound by mutual survival and the understanding that trust in their world was currency more valuable than gold. "Miss Cole has restructured our security apparatus," Dojin announced to the assembled leadership. "All personnel changes require her approval. All protection details report directly to her. All external threats are filtered through her assessment first." He paused, letting the words settle. "She has my complete confidence, which means she has my complete authority in matters of safety." The title they'd started using behind her back, never to her face, was the Queen. Not Dojin's queen, but the queen of the organization's security infrastructure. The woman who'd turned 7 assassins into a cautionary tale, who'd infiltrated a rival faction's operation alone, who'd proven that power in their world didn't always announce itself with tattoos and titles. Raven met each person's eyes around the table, reading the same calculations she'd made herself weeks ago. Fear and respect, curiosity and caution. They'd underestimated her once. None of them would make that mistake again. After the meeting dispersed, Dojin remained in his chair, studying her with that predatory focus that had first appeared in the club. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Raven thought of her studio apartment, the double shifts, the careful anonymity she'd built like armor against her past. That life felt impossibly distant now, separated by violence and choices that couldn't be unmade. "I regret that it took me this long to stop pretending," she said. "And the waitress who wanted invisibility? She died in that club." Raven's reflection caught in the conference room's window, the suited figure looking back at her barely recognizable as the woman who'd carried trays and counted tips. This is who I've always been. I just needed the right battlefield to remember. Dojin stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Then welcome home, Miss Cole. Let's make sure we both survive long enough to enjoy it. The city spread out below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, a kingdom of shadows and power that no longer frightened her. Raven had spent 2 years hiding from violence. Now she stood at its center, the shield between Dojin and the enemies that would never stop coming. She'd finally found the one place where invisibility was impossible and unnecessary, where her skills weren't something to hide, but weapons to wield, where the waitress became the queen, and survival meant embracing the only truth she'd ever known. Some people were born for ordinary lives. She wasn't one of them.